Hello dear tea friends from around the world, and welcome to a new class with me, Stefan Erler, from the Tea Masters blog. And it's a privilege to be with you again. And we are spring, and we are going to talk about green tea again. And last week we had a very interesting class, a very long class also, about brewing techniques and what is green tea and a bit of history. And so today we are going to maybe close on green tea by examining how we can best store and age green tea. And for today, of course, as always, my benefit of teaching a tea class is that I'm brewing for you and for me at the same time. Today I'm doing a very large chashi with this very nice chabu, which is like a shan shui picture with mountains and a river, and I see even a monastery over there, a little pavilion. It's really like where you want to be in spring, outside in nature. It's very green and blue, so very fresh colors, and I hope that this is the spirit that we want to achieve with green tea, and maybe also in this class. Okay, so let's start with first storage of green tea. So storage is really a very important issue for green tea because it is very fragile, and this fragility was already recognized very early on by the Chinese. They said in the Ming Dynasty, Ming Dynasty also said cha yi, which means cha zhong yi bien. So it means tea is easily to change. And actually very early, the Chinese had a remedy for this. They were pressing green tea in the Tang and the Song Dynasty. Green tea was pressed into in circular form with holes inside or not. The holes were to help put several of these pressed forms together on a rope. But by pressing the tea and the leaves, they had less exposure to air, and this was helping the green tea then to be shielded from the air, and especially the oxygen in the air, which is what is making the tea oxidize. And the second component, which we don't want, is moisture. Moisture is also harmful to the quality of the leaves, especially then in conjunction with oxygen. And a third thing is the characteristic of green tea, or of tea in general, is that it really absorbs the smells of its surroundings. So this is a good thing when the tea is growing in the fields, in the mountains, and it gathers the early sense of spring, lots of flowers always around the nicest green tea plantations. You have jasmine, you have cherries, all kinds of flowers. You also have the pipa tree, pipa fruit, and I remember several years ago we had a BiLuoChun that was grown close to pipa trees, and it had the smell of pipa fruit. So this is a good thing when the green tea leaves or the tea leaves absorb the smells of flowers and their surroundings while they are growing, because these smells will still be there after the processing. Of course, another method is to add flower scents, which is what it was very early done with like a jasmine tea or osmanthus tea, by mixing flowers with the leaves and having the leaves pick these smells. So this is a characteristic of a good characteristic of green tea, that it picks the flowers, picks the sense of what is next to it. But it's not a good characteristic once the tea arrives at your home, and you have lots of other smells. Maybe you have a dog, you have a cat, you cook in the kitchen, lots of different meals, and you don't want to have these smells in your tea. You still want to preserve the pure natural smell from the tea gardens only in your leaves. And so what was long time ago the solution? So as I said, during the Tang and the Song dynasty, one way to reduce the exposure to air was to press. But since Ming Dynasty, early Ming Dynasty with Emperor Hongwu, the processing has changed. The emperor did not accept gifts of pressed tea anymore. He only wanted gifts of loose tea, and so this changed the game and the challenge of storing tea. So how did the Ming Dynasty people solve it? They did not have machines to vacuum seal their packages, so they used something else. They used, of course, jars, preferably glazed inside and outside, because the glazing helps to protect the moisture from penetrating into the jar. And for more security, they would do what people do at grocery shops in the US. When you're at the counter, you have a heavy load. What do you ask? Please double bag. So at that time, they did not double bag, but they double jarred. So they would have small jars put in larger jars. Of course, maybe they try to find a bigger one. They had really large jars that were meter high, very large jars that enabled them to put several jars inside, and then really cover and make sure that the first jar also is well protected, maybe with some plate. They also had another mean of protecting. Once it was in the jar, they would add a kind of now I did not look it up, and I'm not so a DIY guy. A kind of plaster or chalk. It's actually quite common. It's yes, it's kind of a powder that when it gathers a lot of moisture becomes hard. So already at that time they knew about this chalk. Maybe people who also don't learn it in Chinese, so I don't have the word and I forgot it. So but I can see what it is, a kind of powder that turns hard when it has gathered a lot of moisture, and so they would add this around or below the jars to gather the moisture, the little moisture that would still go inside the first jar, and this would really help protect the tea inside the smaller jar. Luckily nowadays we don't need to use such expensive jars to protect our tea. This would really be very cumbersome to ship now 1 meter jars. especially now with the Canal of Suez being stuck. We don't want even more merchandise going through that place. So what can we do? Well, but the first thing, actually, even before we start talking about the container, we still have to talk a little bit about the tea itself, because there are different qualities of green tea. And I start to be a bit thirsty, so let me brew some green tea in a bowl, the way I did in the Lynn Garden this week. I hope you have enjoyed the pictures I've posted on Instagram or on my blog, or even on Telegram. You can also follow me on Telegram, Tea Masters blog. This is a bowl by Michel François. I like it very much. It has something very special. Here you can see maybe the glaze, a drop of glaze that stopped just before hitting the ground. Really, it looks, you can say, almost like a teardrop or a drop of water. So it's really amazing how this drop here did not manage to stay like this. Okay, to heat a little bit water, getting some tea. Now, to demonstrate the aging of and the storage of green tea, I'm using my BiLuoChun from 2018. That's enough. So tea that I proposed on my selection 3 years ago. This one was picked on March 23rd, 2018, from the West Mount in Jiangsu. Here, very small. And it still smells very, very nice. Now I'm also going to preheat my cups. Last week we were brewing in Gaiwan, but actually the simplest method is in a bowl. But even in a bowl, we want to really make sure that the bowl is well preheated. And it's a special pleasure to hold a bowl, to look inside, especially when it has nice color variations. Now remember, we have several ways of brewing green tea. We can either add the leaves right away, or first put half the water inside, then the leaves, and then another water. Or we can fill the bowl with leaves, with water, and then add the leaves. Now I'm going to do the second method, with first half filling the bowl with water. Does not really matter how you pour the first time, but it helps to to slow down and to take your time. Now, of course, we add very carefully, and now okay. And we can now empty the cups. Give it a little whirl. And now it's very easy to see when the tea is ready, because the smells come very easily outside to my nose, and I can see how open the leaves are, and it's a very nice show for me. Sorry, you don't see it better. Maybe like this. So the water is at a boil. So that's why even I put it again to a boil. And now I can use this little spoon. This is a late Qing Dynasty soup spoon. Up and more. Very light. Nice. Very, very pure. Light fragrances, and still a very amazing level of freshness, given that it's already 3 years old. And this very light note that is very typical for BiLuoChun, which is really this was so 23rd of March, which is really very early, since the best part of the season is before April the 5th, Qingmingjie, and so March 23rd is really well, almost 2 weeks before that date, and the earlier the better, because leaves will be the smallest. As we wait, or as the days go, the leaves receive more and more sunshine. They grow faster and faster, and then they, little by little, they lose their particular freshness and small size. And also, instead of being very pointy, they become more and more round. So that's a big difference. Now, quality of the green tea will have therefore an impact on preserving the tea also. So the earlier it is made, in this case, the higher the quality, and then the more, of course, the freshness it has, and the more freshness it has, the once it is more worth it to keep it, and it's easier to preserve something that is very fresh, because aging always means a certain loss of power, of strength. So if you have a tea that is very little fresh to begin with, it's one already not so valuable, and it will lose its little freshness much faster. Whereas something that is really extra concentrated in aromas, it has more of this freshness to keep, and it's much more difficult to lose it. Also, by being very small, it's easier to nowadays to keep. So I had kept it in this plastic foil. So, and then in this kind of foil, it's easier to fold it in a way that it reduces the amount of air that is in contact with these leaves. If the tea had been older and takes more space, then because it's bigger, then the shape would also make it more difficult to reduce the amount of air that is in contact with the leaves. Another thing is in the quality of the leaves. We were saying that there are 3 ways of stopping the oxidation, and also then of drying the leaves. Steam, the wok, or an oven. And what is important then is how it is dried and how well it is dried. Because if it's not dried very much, it will smell more fresh and more fragrant right away when it's done, but because the moisture level in the leaves is rather high, this moisture will make it more difficult to keep for a long time. The example that comes to mind is raisin. A dried raisin, when it's well dried, can be kept for much longer than a fresh one, or one that is not fully dried. Now we can see this also with green tea. The level of dryness in the green tea will vary a lot. Usually those green teas that are the least dry, so you can feel it with your fingers when something is very dry, it cracks more easily. When something is lighter, has more moisture, it's therefore a bit more damp, and it will bend rather than crack. And also the color. The color will be more fresh green for something that is more full of moisture, and something that is better dried will have a darker color. Well, of course, this is a bit more difficult to see on BiLuoChun because of the many buds, which are very white. So maybe this is a bit difficult. So here you have to really look for each green tea and compare different lots to see what I mean. Another good example is Longjin. Now this is the cover of a book written by T. Parker, and you can see these leaves of Longjin. They are not very green in terms of fresh green. They are not green like these leaves. They are more yellow greenish, and this is a sign that the drying was very well done. And this by drying for Longjin, for instance, causes some a bit more nutty aromas, but because it's so much better dried than Longines that has a fresh green color, it is also much more suitable for being stored because of the low moisture level. Okay, let me drink some more, and I'll continue. If you have any questions, I'm checking my feed to see. Now also a lot of sweetness. But this very nice, very light note of like a violin playing, very nice. Of course, it does not work. Okay. So, how long can one store and age green tea? Now, in my classes with T. Parker, I have had the opportunity to try some Longines that were 30 and even 40 years old, and that he had purchased and did not like. He stored them away, and then years later he brewed them again and found, oh, actually I was just doing it wrong. Actually, these teas do taste very nice. So it is possible to drink really very, very old green teas, provided they were well stored, and provided that the quality of the green tea was also high, and that the process was well done with a low moisture level. But what are you drinking in an old green tea? Well, there are two things. Always with the tea, it's the scent and the taste. In terms of scent, a very old green tea will have completely different smells, fragrances. It will turn almost like Chinese medicine or old wood. Leaves are wood, so it's a bit normal that we find these very strange old wood smells in old green tea. Maybe a little bit similar to some older brewer, but yet again not exactly the same. There's much less camphor or these very heavy smells. The smells are still a bit lighter, but I would say these smells are a bit strange, and maybe not for everybody to enjoy. If you enjoy Chinese medicine, maybe just go to a Chinese medicine shop and buy yourself some very typical very strongly scented Chinese medicine, and maybe who knows, it might even be good for you. But joke aside, the other reason to drink aged green tea could be for the taste, and then to realize, to experience something quite amazing, is that when it's well preserved, the taste of older green tea is still there. It still has the same kind of purity and natural feeling and lightness, and almost at the end, when you've brewed the aged green tea several times, it will turn again green, and for a moment it's like, oh, it's back. And this is it can be a bit a nostalgic feeling, because all of a sudden it's the past coming back to life. and also the idea of being able to preserve this purity, this freshness at the end, despite the time that has gone, and it affected the smells, but it did not affect the essence, the core of the tea, which is its taste. So this can be a very amazing experience to see that even green tea can be aged and can be preserved very well. But in terms of intensity, it is much less than the intensity of oolong or of pu'er. So it's not something I would really recommend on purpose and say, oh, let's store 1 kilogram or 10 kilogram of green tea, and in 30 years it's going to be amazing, and it will be worth a fortune. Or no, actually, the teas with most potential are still pu'er and Hongshui oolongs, roasted oolongs. For green tea, it's because of the loss of strength, and to begin with, this tea is very light, so it's much more difficult to really appreciate. So it might not be everybody's cup of tea, pun, but it can be interesting to experiment. And anyway, it is important to preserve the freshness of green tea during the year, or maybe for a year or two. So it's also important to know how to store green tea very well, because likely you're not going to be able to drink the green tea that you receive all at once. So it still makes sense to preserve it very well for 1 year or 2 years, and maybe you forget it, and in 30 years you find it again, and then it's nice to know that you have stored it well, to be able to still enjoy this special freshness or purity in the leaves. So my point, I'm rambling here now. My point is, what are the containers to store it well? Even if it's only for a year, until the next harvest, or 2 or 3 years, like for this tea, which still has very interesting freshness. So I would say it is still very enjoyable. Now you see, let's see how it tastes when it's a bit stronger. Because I've let it brew a bit longer. Of course, now a little bit of bitterness comes when it's allowed to brew for a much longer time. Concentration is also a bit too strong, so now is a good time to add some hot water to dilute it, and maybe get some more aromas from the leaves again. So for modern teas, therefore, to preserve the freshness, first look at the quality, that the green tea is well dried to begin with, that it's a higher quality green tea, because we don't use a lot of leaves. It's really not about quantity of leaves that we use, but about the quality of the brew. And then the plastic foils have really an advantage, that they are able to be kind of pressed so that you can minimize the amount of air inside. If you are able to fill a jar, then fill it completely to the top. Then you can use porcelain jar that is glazed inside and outside, or even better for preserving freshness of green tea are pewter jars, especially the Chinese chaozhou or the Japanese ones. In this one, I've preserved BiLuoChun from Jiangsu from the year 2005. So maybe tomorrow I'm going to try. I have very little left, but I will probably drink it tomorrow. Okay. And now let's add some more. Hot water, boiling water. Let it mix and let it brew with a spoon. I can also make it a little bit dense. And having a dark bowl helps to see the contrast with the bright color of the tea. That's quite beautiful. Okay, we are nearing the end of the class. Please let me know if you have any more questions. Otherwise, I'll end up with some news about green tea. Yesterday I went to Sanxia to my BiLuoChun farmer, and he has made some very nice tea again. This year I selected a lot that he made on March the 4th. Last year it was March the 6th, I checked. And so it's very similar in terms of quality, because it was made at a similar time in the year. So very high quality. I brewed it last week in the class, and even last year's BiLuoChun still smelled and tasted very, very fresh. So I'll add this tea later on today. So maybe by the time you get up tomorrow, you will be able to find it in my selection on t-masters.com. And I also added a baozhong from his plantation, one that he made on March 20, and you will see that one too tomorrow, I guess. Thank you very much for joining me, and have a nice evening and a nice tea. Bye bye.